Myself and make a chronological summary about how the Syrian crisis became a deadliest tragedy, I would write straight ahead: disinformation, disinformation, disinformation. First, disinformation on a media informative level. The journalistic reports were false, counterfeited, and unlawful on a world scale. This is regrettable for the profession and in contradiction with the Munich Chart of Journalism. For example, it is said in the first declaration of this Munich Chart, respecting the truth no matter what consequences it may bring about to him, and this is because the right of the public is to know the truth. Second, disinformation. It's on a world political leading level. All the real objectives of the political decision makers and executives were hidden under false, pompous, and angelical-like titles. The result is a global misbehave of the supreme world political leaders in total discrepancy with the international laws, thus applied with a capricious and tyrannical mood. And third, sadly, disinformation on a humanitarian monitoring level. International NGOs dedicated to peace, justice, and human rights monitoring, I will not cite them here, and even United Nations global agencies are acting in baffling symbiosis with the unfair political hypocrisy, issuing humanitarian statements that can be defined as politically aligned, biased, and even false, to the point that humanitarian statements containing unfair accusations became a ready-to-take lever to justify paradoxically proxy wars, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Humanitarian NGOs and agencies added their voices to states involved in destroying Syria. They manipulated the public opinion to the point that international humanitarian laws and the right to protect law became Trojan horses to foster the foreign invasions of a sovereign state by hordes of mercenaries, and when the destruction has weakened the Syrian army, they claim to finish the destructive work under the 7th chapter of the United Nations Charter. Now, about the anti-government armed group. Some anti-government armed group mistreated and tortured persons in their custody, while such violations were committed in isolated instances. There are strong indications that such practices are on the rise. Dear ladies and gentlemen, this is a total disfigurement of the reality in Syria. I have, and I will bring to Geneva, opponents that are living in rebel-held environment, that are screaming and asking the Syrian army to come and realize, apply its duty to protect them. In Yabrut, for example, today, they are screaming, when will you come to help us and deliver us? When a commission of inquiry describe to you the situation like this, you will believe it, and you will not believe us, and you will politicize us, and you will say that we are not right. It's the best for you to do is to come and see with your own eyes what is happening on the Syrian ground. Now I finish with Adra, the horrendous invasion of Adra. I have here in my computer horrendous documentaries that reflect some of the terrible fate of citizens whose unique vote is to be state employees or from another religious minorities, a part of a non-radical Sunni community, or simply to be used as a mean of pressure through terror by foreign mercenaries framed with some Syrian armed group. How the international community, who says that its first concern is the international humanitarian law and the right to protect, is accepting that some of the most prominent states within the United Nations finance, arm, and protects horde of terrorists that lacks of the most elementary principle of humanity and are using atrocities to implement the reign of terror in a way to have a rapid control on the ground. What I can state here about Adra is that it is totally ignored by the reports of the Commission. Its horrendous profile will remain a shame and a scandal when it will be unveiled. I let Dr. Nabil Fayyad convey to you his interviews with Adra survivors, a task that should have been performed by the Commission inquirer. Even though we brought some prominent witnesses to Lebanon to be interviewed, how it is possible that nothing was said about what is becoming the summary of all inhuman realities in Syria?
Everyone is crying and mourning to see the daily suffering of the Syrian people. But what do they do? Nothing. Quite frankly, I say that the approach of the United Nations, in particular the Human Rights Commission in Geneva regarding the Syrian crisis, increases in deepening the disaster in which we live. The absurd war inside Syria are portrayed as a conflict between the forces of the state and the opposition forces. This is not true. The absurd war, which revolves in my country today, is a war between the Syrian civil society and the Islamic terrorist groups led by strangers from various countries and funded by strangers from various countries, especially Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, which considered finally those groups as terrorist organizations, is the country that sent, trained, and funded terrorism in order to destroy Syria. The story is ended with the FSA, and the arena is occupied by Islamic terrorist groups. We have reached out yesterday with Yabrud, another Syrian city that has been destroyed. 400 young Yabrudis, at least, want to turn from fighters against the state to fighters with the state. Raqqa is governed by Daesh, by iron and fire. A girl was killed there just because she possessed an account on Facebook. Churches in Raqqa has become a headquarters for Daesh. People are forced to pray 5 times a day, and women teams are dedicated to whip unveiled girls in the streets of Raqqa. Their resort is governed by the terrorist group called Jabhat al-Nusra. Secularists there are being killed just because they are secular. Latin Church was destroyed just as happened in Raqqa. Who are the leaders of Daesh and Al-Jabha? Qataris, Saudis, Chechens, Afghans, and even Chinese. Will these terrorists came to spread democracy and human rights in Syria? No. The problem is the international community. They do not want to see the truth and still believe that there is a delusion called the Free Syrian Army. Here we want to ask, what is the relationship between democracy and the girl that killed because she has an account on Facebook? What is the relationship between human rights and the destruction of the churches and synagogues? What is the relationship between freedom and the elimination of last Aramaic town in the world, Ma'lula? Questions wait the Mrs. Navi Pillay to answer on. What did Mrs. Navi Pillay do for the liberation of thousands of other detainees in the prison of Al-Tawba and Douma? What did she do to put an end to the tragedy of the 20th century, which happened before eyes and ears of the world? What have you done for the homeless people of Adra who are wandering in the streets of Damascus? What did you do to liberate women and children who were kidnapped by the Islamic terrorism from villages north of Latakia after killing of men? What did Mrs. Navi Pillay do to restore those simple peasants to their villages? Yes, because they are Alawites, and Alawites have nothing to do with oil and gas states. The international community does not want to listen to their plight. Ismailis, in contrast, who usually were the masters of opposition in Syria, are exposed today to a form of genocide just because they are Ismailis. Ismailis suffered in Adra the worst kind of genocide. They have been also subjected in Al-Kafat to a terrorist attack that killed innocent. This is also the case of Tal ad-Dura and Salamiyya. Ismailis are a small minority in the Syrian and Islamic world, so they don't find support from the organizers of the international affairs, who have no time to follow up their extermination at the hands of the Islamic terrorist groups. The situation of Christians is not better than other minorities. For example, Sadat, the Christian Syriac town, was attacked last summer by groups of Islamic terrorism, which killed, raped, and destroyed before leaving. They also attacked Ma'lula, stole homes, displaced people, and destroyed much of the historic features of the village for no other reasons but because the two towns are Christians. They had occupied the Christian towns in the countryside of Idlib. No need to remind you that they were responsible for the destruction of the Christian neighborhoods in the city of Homs and shelling the Christian neighborhood in Damascus by mortar.
Here, and I ask you also to make the real information beside you, all around. I want to, well, in my speech, I will only take an overall situation of all what we saw in, about Syria. So I remind, a little reminder, historical reminder, telling that Syria has been the cradle of civilization. Syria gave the world messages of civilization, of, sorry, I'm too much. Syria gave the world also the first music, alphabet, the first peace, treaties, and real Syria is a real mosaic of people, of religions and spirits, and we live together from thousands of years. Syria has 10,000 years.